The wind had been rising since late afternoon, pushing dark clouds across the wide Wyoming sky like restless cattle. By evening, the storm had settled in fully. Rain lashed the open land, and cold thunder rolled over the lonely prairie. Caleb Dawson rode slowly through the storm. His hat was pulled low over his brow, and his long coat snapped in the wind. The horse beneath him, a steady brown gelding named Rusty, moved carefully through the muddy trail. Caleb had spent most of his life on land like this, vast, empty, and honest, the kind of place where a man could hear his own thoughts. Tonight, though, the land felt different, uneasy. Caleb had stayed late in town repairing a broken fence at the Miller Ranch. By the time he started home, the sky had already turned dark and restless. Lightning flashed across the plains. For a moment the bright light revealed something ahead on the road. Rusty slowed. Caleb leaned forward slightly, squinting through the rain. At first he thought it was a broken wagon or maybe a pile of fallen wood, but as another flash of lightning lit the road, he saw the shape more clearly. Someone was sitting there, a woman. Caleb pulled Rusty to a stop. The wind howled through the tall grass as he swung down from the saddle. Rain soaked through his coat immediately. "Ma'am," he called gently over the storm. The woman didn't answer. She sat in the mud beside a small wooden trunk, her shoulders slumped, her dress soaked through with rain. Long dark hair clung to her face. She looked like she had been sitting there for hours. Caleb stepped closer. "Ma'am, are you all right?" Slowly she lifted her head. Her eyes were wide and tired. Not frightened exactly, just empty in the way of someone who had run out of strength. I'm fine," she said quietly, but the way her voice trembled told a different story. Caleb glanced at the trunk beside her. The letters painted across the top had been partially washed by rain, but he could still read enough. "Mail order?" His brow furrowed. "You come in on the evening train?" he asked. She nodded weakly. "Yes. Someone supposed to meet you?" Her silence answered before she spoke. "Yes," she said after a moment, "but he didn't." Another roll of thunder echoed over the plains. Caleb looked around at the empty road stretching in both directions. No wagon tracks, no lantern light from town, just storm and darkness. "What's your name?" he asked. "Emily Carter." Caleb nodded slowly. "Well, Miss Carter, you can't stay out here in this weather." She looked at him uncertainly. "I don't want to be trouble." "You ain't trouble," Caleb said calmly. "You're soaked and freezing." He lifted the trunk easily and carried it toward his horse. "My place is about a mile west. Small cabin, dry roof, warm fire." Emily hesitated. In truth, she had very little choice left. The man who had sent for her, someone named Thomas Reed, had never appeared at the station. The last wagon had left hours ago. The station master had locked the doors and gone home before the storm worsened. She had waited. Then the rain came, and hope slowly began to fade. Now this stranger stood in front of her offering shelter, not comfort, just shelter. She slowly stood. "I'd appreciate that," she said quietly. Caleb helped her onto the horse while he walked beside them through the storm. The ride was quiet. Rain softened the world around them, turning the plains into a whispering gray sea. After a while, Caleb spoke. "You traveled far, from Missouri." Emily said softly, "That's a long road." "Yes." She didn't explain more. Most mail-order brides didn't speak much about the reasons they left home. Caleb understood that. His cabin finally appeared through the rain, a small wooden structure tucked near a stand of cottonwood trees. Warm light glowed from the single window. Emily looked surprised. "You left a lantern burning." Caleb shrugged slightly. I usually do. Inside, the cabin smelled of pine wood and coffee. Caleb quickly stirred the fire while Emily stood near the door, dripping rainwater onto the floor. Blankets are on that chair, he said. Dry clothes in the chest there, nothing fancy but warmer than that dress. Emily nodded gratefully. While she changed behind a curtain, Caleb boiled water for tea. When she stepped back out, she looked smaller somehow. Wrapped in an oversized flannel shirt and wool trousers, she seemed almost fragile. He handed her a steaming cup. They sat across from each other at the small wooden table. The storm rattled the windows. Why didn't the man come? Caleb asked gently. Emily stared into her cup. I don't know, she admitted. We wrote letters for 4 months. 4 months, yes. Her voice softened. He seemed kind in his letters, said he owned a small ranch, said he needed someone who wasn't afraid of hard work. Caleb nodded slowly. That's most folks out here. She took a small sip of tea. I sold everything to make the journey. The words came out quietly. My father passed last winter. There was nothing keeping me in Missouri. Caleb listened without interrupting. I thought, she began, then stopped. What? Emily gave a faint, tired smile. I thought I was traveling toward a new life. Another crack of thunder shook the cabin. Caleb leaned back slightly. You still might be. Emily shook her head gently. I don't even know where I'll go tomorrow. Silence settled between them. The fire crackled softly. Finally Caleb stood. You can sleep in the bed tonight, he said. I'll take the chair. Emily immediately protested. No, I can't. You can, he said simply. Something about his calm voice made arguing pointless. She nodded quietly. Thank you, Mr. Dawson, Caleb Dawson. Thank you, Mr. Dawson. That night the storm slowly passed. But sleep didn't come easily for either of them. Emily lay awake, listening to the quiet creak of the cabin. Caleb sat by the fire, staring into the fading embers. Morning arrived with golden sunlight pouring across the prairie. The storm had washed the land clean. Emily stepped outside the cabin and breathed deeply. The air smelled of wet earth and fresh grass. It was beautiful, but the same question still waited. What now? Caleb came outside carrying 2 tin plates of breakfast. Eggs and biscuits, he said. Ain't fancy, but it'll do. They ate on the small porch. Birds chirped in the cottonwood trees. Finally Emily spoke. I'll go into town today, she said quietly. Maybe someone knows where Mr. Reed is. Caleb nodded. I can ride you in. They saddled Rusty and rode toward town under the bright morning sun. The streets were muddy from the storm. At the general store, Caleb spoke with the shopkeeper, Thomas Reed. The man repeated, Yeah, I remember him. Emily leaned forward slightly. Do you know where he is? The shopkeeper scratched his beard. Left town 3 weeks ago. Emily blinked. Left, sold his land, packed up, headed south. The words felt heavy in the air. Emily stared down at her hands. So he knew I was coming, she whispered. The shopkeeper gave an uncomfortable shrug. Looks that way. Outside the store, Emily stood silently. Caleb waited beside her. After a moment, she laughed softly, but it wasn't the sound of happiness. I suppose that answers that. You all right? Caleb asked gently. She nodded, yes, but her eyes were glassy. I'll find work somewhere. Caleb studied her for a moment. You ever worked a ranch before? Emily blinked. No, but I'm not afraid to learn. Caleb nodded slowly. Well, my fence line could use fixing. She looked up, and the barn roof leaks when it rains. A faint spark appeared in her tired eyes. You're offering me a job? Offering you a chance to stay a while, Caleb said. Emily stared at him. Why? Caleb thought for a moment, then he answered honestly, because nobody deserves to be left alone in a storm. The words settled gently between them. That afternoon they rode back to the cabin. Emily unpacked her small trunk. It didn't take long. A few dresses, 2 books, a photograph of her father. Days turned into weeks. Emily learned quickly. She helped repair fences, gather eggs, and plant vegetables near the cabin. Caleb discovered something unexpected. The cabin felt different now, less quiet. Even the evenings seemed warmer. Sometimes they shared stories by the fire. Sometimes they simply listened to the wind in the trees. One evening, months later, Emily stood on the porch watching the sunset paint the prairie gold. Caleb walked up beside her. "You ever regret coming west?" he asked. Emily thought carefully. "I regretted it for about one night," she said. He smiled slightly. "Just one. That storm was terrible." She laughed softly. They stood quietly for a moment. Then she added, "But if that storm never happened, I never would have met you." Caleb looked out across the endless fields. Sometimes life changed not through grand plans or careful decisions. Sometimes it changed through storms, through missed trains, through strangers who stopped on lonely roads, and sometimes hope arrived when a person had almost none left. Caleb tipped his hat slightly toward her. "Well," he said quietly, "I'm glad the storm came." Emily smiled. And for the first time since leaving Missouri, the future no longer felt like an empty road.